Welcome back to the Fourth Way Podcast. In this episode, I had the opportunity to talk with Jay Newman. As you listen to this episode, I want you to keep your ears open for two major concepts and themes throughout. The first concept is that the state is going to state. It's going to do what states do. Now, since states are usurpers of God and seek to be Lord, this means that they seek to put all things into subjection to them. Now, that's very reminiscent of what is said about Jesus in the Bible, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, who will have all things placed into subjection under him, under his feet. And 1 Corinthians 15:8 and Hebrews 2:8 talks all about that. Now, Jesus is Lord and Caesar is not, yet Caesar tries to be Lord. And for many Christians, Caesar is Lord, as we participate in his ceremonies and sacrifices, and we look to government as true salvation, while we view the church as an impotent country club. The state seeks to subject all, and this extends even into the smallest minutiae, like sporting events being used as propaganda for state control. So while we do delve a bit into propaganda in this episode, I do want to use this as kind of a plug for the next season, which is going to get a lot more into propaganda and unpack some of the things that we've talked about in this episode or hinted at in this episode. In fact, I've already provided links to the first two episodes of the season, pre-released, in my episode where I interview Robert Mirapol. So I'll link that episode in the notes so you can hear that interview and listen to the first two episodes on propaganda early. So the first concept, the state is going to state. That's important to listen out for. But the second thing I want you to track is what our Christian response ought to be to this fact that the state is going to seek to usurp God. Many Christian anarchists end up being more focused on the anarchy part than the Christian part, focusing on attacking and critiquing the state rather than building the type of community where Jesus is portrayed as Lord through our love, service, and actions. Positive anarchy, or discipleship as we identify it, is something that ends up being a major concept in this interview and is different from just a mere critique of the state. Critiquing the state is negative, it's a tearing down. But positive anarchy, or as we identify it here, discipleship, is really something that ends up being a major concept in this interview. Discipleship, not conversion, is the Great Commission, and I think a lot more Christians need to understand that. Sure, conversion precedes discipleship and it's necessary to it, but emphasizing conversion to the exclusion or neglect of discipleship is a get-rich-quick scheme. Pray this prayer, then you're a Christian. That's not the gospel. Discipling people to live in the kingdom that Lord Jesus established is the gospel. Critiquing the state is not the gospel. Converting people and playing a numbers game with your religion, denomination, or political party isn't the gospel. Coercing people through legislation to comport with your brand of morality, which you tout as God's brand, isn't the gospel. The gospel is not a top-down approach, but a bottom-up approach. It's an upside-down kingdom where the last are first and where conquering comes by cross. If you keep these two ideas in your mind, that states set themselves up as pseudo-kingdoms, and that our job is to disciple others into an alternative kingdom, then you'll get your bang for your buck out of this discussion. So here it is, my interview with Jay Newman. Why don't you just start by introducing yourself really quickly? And I think, one of the most pertinent things to kind of bring up is, I heard that, you came to the conclusion of Christian anarchism and you used to be very pro-state and into politics, but then you kind of shifted. And I think 2016 was a pretty big time where you shifted, which for me was true, and for a lot of people that I've talked to. So if you could just kind of give your background and where you've come from and how you got to Christian anarchism, that would be awesome.
Yeah, sure. My name is Jay Newman, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee. And as far as like my political leanings, I guess my background would probably be described better as politically conservative. I mean, I come from the American South, so that's kind of just a general, especially growing up in a rural area. So that's just
sorry, first of all, Nashville, Tennessee, but you have an Eagles hat on.
Yeah. Right? So I grew up in Arkansas, and when I was growing up, well, first of all, the Tennessee Titans didn't exist. There were the Houston Oilers when I was growing up, and there just was no geographical affiliation. So I did know that there were a lot of Dallas Cowboys fans, and I did not like them at all. And so, you know, I got into pro football, and, you know, you have to pick your team when you're growing up in a middle of nowhere. So I picked the Eagles, one, because they hate the Cowboys, and two, their best player at the time, Reggie White, was a Christian minister and was an exciting player. And I just loved the team. I loved everything about it. And something about being an Eagles fan fits my personality as well. So, yeah, I've been an Eagles fan for probably over 30 years now.
Yeah, I'm from Pennsylvania, so I understand that.
Oh, yeah. What part are you from?
Lancaster County area, Lebanon County.
Yeah,
Hershey.
Heck yeah. My wife grew up in Hershey.
Okay, yeah, I'm from a small town. I always say, you know, Lancaster because people know Amish. But I'm from Annville, which is like there's Hershey, Palmyra, Annville. So she asked her, she'll probably
crazy.
know Annville.
Yeah, she absolutely does. My sister-in-law lives in Palmyra now, so yeah, I kind of know the area.
So sorry, I interrupted your story about yourself for football.
Yeah, no, go Birds. You don't have I don't mind that interruption. I would talk about the Eagles all day. They're very frustrating. But it is kind of connected because sports has become kind of my outlet for some things that maybe the state tries to capitalize on, you know, like this team spirit type of adherence to a tribe and this kind of thing. But, you know, the consequences aren't as drastic as, you know, invading other countries and killing civilians. So, you know, so it's like the terms of the game are a little different. So sports is, you know, I think there is something in all humans that draws us towards a kind of being on a team, you know, cheering for a team, having the home team that you cheer for, and being loyal to a group. And, you know, I think sports is a way that is healthy, and, well, it's not always healthy, but at least the consequences aren't like being, yay, Team America, you know, support our troops, military, and like not really thinking about what it is that we're thanking them for, you know, like, so yeah, these questions have always been a part of my mindset. My parents raised me to not have a political allegiance to one party. So, and my parents were be very vocal. They prayed about the candidate. They did not vote party lines. Like each candidate we take on a case by case basis, and we don't care about their party. We care about their policies. So that's the way I was raised. I think that's right, to a degree. But I wonder if it's not impossible now. Like, I think in an ideal world, that would be great. Let's vote for the candidates. And the problem is every candidate that's out there has been put there by the party. And the only way that they're going to keep their position is if they are loyal to the party. So you may think you're voting for a candidate, but if they're affiliated with a party, that's what they're going to do. They're not going to represent you over their party. And so it's kind of like maybe overly idealistic to think you can vote for a candidate instead of their party. You know, you will end up voting for both. So yeah, so my disillusionment with politics probably began, well, almost as soon as I was aware of them. I guess the first thing that happened for me that was like really felt like it hurt me was that I supported George W. Bush for president, and I really did like his platform. And if I go back and look at his platform now, I still like it. The problem was he never was that president that he said he was going to be. And to some degree, you give him a break because 9/11 happened. And, you know, I give you a break for change. But man, the way he went was just so heavy-handed and almost totalitarian with the Patriot Act and, you know, like cracking down and then starting a war for no reason. What did Iraq have to do with 9/11, you know? And it just like didn't make any sense. But then you're going around and everybody's like, yep, we got to do it. We got to do it. And I'm like, there's no dissenting voices, even in the church. It was really, really frustrating. And I guess the next big thing that happened was, for me, I did get very much into the Ron Paul movement when he ran for president in 2008 and 2012. And I wasn't the only one. He would get hundreds of thousands of people at his rallies. And then that's what I was saying about the party loyalty. Like, he easily was the most popular candidate running for Republican ticket. He easily was the most popular. Like, he was generating more buzz. More people were coming to his rallies like by tenfold than anyone else, whether it was McCain in 2008 or Romney in 2012. Like, they were not popular like the way Ron Paul was popular. They didn't care because Ron Paul wouldn't play ball. They were never going to give him the Republican candidacy for president. They were never going to. The Republican Party wouldn't let it happen, you know, and they were just hoping that some people who were followers of his would maybe filter over to their side, I guess. I don't know what, and that's when you start to realize, like, man, this is not about policies. This is not about the individuality of the candidates. You really are stuck with a two-party system that really neither party's different. They both want to grow the government tremendously. They just disagree on how to spend the money. And we're getting taxed more than ever, and they're spending more than ever, and they're inflating the dollar with the debt that they're accruing, and they just keep spending more. And it's like neither party changes it. So that's when you just kind of be like, what are we going to do? There's got to be a different way. And what does this have to do with sorry, I'm outside and I get someone, I don't know if they lost their muffler. I don't know if you heard that. I could barely hear anything. Yeah, you just get to where you're like, this is no longer compatible with my faith. Like this, at one point you think that, oh, this can work together. I mean, I never thought we were going to save the world through politics, and some people do think that, but I've never thought that. I just thought, well, there's a way to be a faithful Christian in a country, you know, under the rule of a state. There's a way to be a faithful Christian. Now I think I'm not totally committing to this entirely, but I think right now that the only way to be a faithful Christian within the being a citizen of a state is to not participate at all. Try to be a good citizen, but like I cannot think of any way to be a part of the system that has been created and still think that you have a pure heart before God, because you make yourself culpable, right? I mean, maybe not. People will disagree on the ethics of that, but it feels dirty to me. It feels dirty to even have anything to do with it. So I don't know. I realize I just said a lot, but you asked me a very broad question, so I just threw a lot of stuff out there. Why don't you?
No, that's what I love about these about interviews is that I love the improvisation and trying to figure out where to go. So thanks for that.
Yeah,
lots to work with. First I would just want to ask you, have you read Aiden Ballou by any chance?
No, I know the name, but I don't believe I've read him.
I'll have to send you a fantastic quote that he has, but he has his book is great. Can't think of the title off the top of my head at the moment, but he's got a section where he talks about complicity, like by participating,
right.
your complicity. And he says, like, basically, if you vote for somebody and they do something, whatever they do, that's within the laws of the Constitution, you've agreed to them doing that because you've said, okay, I agree to this system, and whatever you do within those parameters, I'm good with. So, you know, George W. Bush goes to war, Congress approves it, and all that stuff. Like, I'm culpable because I approved it within those bounds. Like, I knew what he could do with that power that I gave him. So I'll shoot that to you later. But
that's a very, I will say that is a very good argument. I'm staying in the middle on it because I understand that that's not like, yeah, I can argue both sides of that to a degree, but I just think that even introducing the idea of moral culpability or complicity, I like that, is it should make people think before they go support a candidate. Like, if they should think about their own complicity about what that person's going to do, which you can't predict entirely. You know, you can within reason, but you have no idea. They're going to tell you they're going to be a certain kind of leader that they are in no way bound to fulfill. And like, they never do. I mean, that's like the whole cliche of being a politician, is like they just lie to get your votes. And they all do it to one degree or another. So I just like yeah, I mean, that's a hard one that I think most people don't ask themselves. They've made these, they've compartmentalized so that they don't ever think about their own moral responsibility for their political advocacy. And I just think introducing the idea without saying, like, I think the other side of it is you can't go around saying, pointing fingers at people. That's never going to go well. It's like, you're the reason, you know, you killed all those Arabs in Yemen. Well, no, they actually didn't. So there are levels of moral complicity, right? So yeah, they didn't pull the trigger. But they're just to acknowledge that there might be some small level of guilt by association, like, I think needs to at least be discussed.
Yeah, because I think Americans are really good at pointing that out with other people. So like the Holocaust, you'll hear quotes all the time, you know, evil prevails when good men do nothing, and all that kind of stuff. So so those German citizens were complicit with the Nazi government because they didn't do anything. It seems very similar. You know, with
hypocritical, doesn't it? Yeah,
it does.
I mean, I'm not saying, I'm just saying.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think there are two maybe pushbacks that, and I think the strongest pushback is, okay, so I don't want to be complicit with the state because the tools of the state are coercion through force. Like, that's what legislation is. It's you know, force is the power of the sword. And so for me to keep my hands clean, you know, as a Christian anarchist, I say, well, I'm not participating in the system. And so a lot of people would portray that as retreatism. And so me choosing to not participate is me choosing to not be effective, to not love my neighbor. And I think there are, you know, especially with oppressed communities, you know, I think especially of you know, the Black community, where you have a lot of people in that community who say, like, we need to get our rights through voting and such. And so Christian anarchism is hard to even imagine. So I'd love for maybe you to talk about how Christian anarchism is not non-participation. And one of the examples that comes to mind is when I heard your discussion earlier, you had mentioned a charter school and kind of how anarchy works. So maybe you could kind of give us a vision for how Christian anarchism can be participation, and even more meaningfully without the moral compromise.
Yeah, sure. So the idea that people have that the candidates they vote for are going to alter society in a way that is more beneficial for the most people, and whether you think that's merely pragmatic or that it is also in some moral or righteous way that we're improving society by voting for these leaders who are going to enact these policies. So that's a top-down way of thinking, that we're going to vote for leaders who are going to enact policies that are going to create a society that is more just for the most people. That doesn't seem to be working. It's never really seemed to work. I would love an example of that where the state has actually made a more just society for the most people. It's just historically, it's not really how it goes. So, and even if someone could cite something, it would be the exception, not the rule. The idea behind Christian anarchism is to say that we see the top as Christ. So as far as society is concerned, we're already turning what's up is down and what's down is up. We're turning the world upside down. So we go from a top-down perspective with Christ as our king, and that flows down into creating a just society by transforming the hearts of those who have received his love and are faithful to live out their lives in obedience to him. We believe that that's how the top down works. But as far as society is concerned, it's inverted. So how it looks to our society is bottom up, right? So what does that mean? It means that as you live your life with your family, with your neighbors, you look at ways that you can express love and create an atmosphere of justice that ultimately, as it takes hold, changes society from the small ways to the big ways. So instead of enacting policies and hoping that those trickle down to things like our schools and our local laws and things like that, we're saying we're going to live in such a way in our households, in our schools, in our communities, other ways we interact in the neighborhood, that's going to transform society from the small to the big, right? And that's the idea of how when Jesus said, to think of the mustard seed, and the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. It's so small, but it becomes this massive tree where all the birds of the air can perch and rest and all this. The kingdom of God is like that. So that's what that means from being bottom up. Like you go from this one small bit of transformation, whether it's in your household or in your community of believers, your church, and you say, what are the needs of our society? So you mentioned the charter school. There was, it's as an example of changing society, there was an inequity in our neighborhood that was, it's a continually gentrifying neighborhood. In fact, I'm looking right across the street at 13 townhomes that are currently being built. And they're probably going to go for, I don't know, just insane amounts of money that 5 years ago, the residents on this street, not a single one of them could have afforded it, right? And so you're like looking at this, and so you have a very diverse neighborhood, and how the school started to look was not reflecting the diversity of the neighborhood. You had schools with predominantly Black students whose families are getting outpriced from the area. And then you had schools of predominantly white students in areas that in a school that used to be predominantly Black is now almost totally white and middle, upper to upper class. And so, well, this doesn't seem just or right. It's like, okay, the housing market is what the housing market is, but we still all live here. How can we still live together as neighbors? And so we had a guy launch a charter school with the express purpose of creating opportunities for all students in the neighborhood, regardless of their economic background. And so what we have seen, long story short, we've seen a lot of imitations. We've seen that Metro Nashville Education was antagonistic towards this at first, but they see that they're number one in all these metrics. They're the best school in the whole county out of like 180 schools. So then the Metro Education Board goes, okay, they're doing something that's working. We should imitate that, right? So that's what I mean. It's not non-participation. It's saying we believe justice works this way because Christ in his mercy has saved us, and he has transformed our hearts, and he has called us to live a life with our neighbors in love. And that means promoting equity and justice for them. We're not pushing that away. We're not saying we're not going to advocate for that. We're saying that we transform the society by living from that truth in such a way that we believe is the only way that works. The only way justice comes is through the reign of Jesus Christ. So we live under that reign in a way that does have an effect of creating more justice for our neighborhoods and for our societies in which we dwell and live. That's how it works. And we believe that it works that way. And what's the world around going to do? Well, historically speaking, if you look at the history of the church, that's how the church has taken hold. It's like, why are the Christians not afraid to serve the sick? Why are the Christians able to thrive during adverse circumstances like famines, war, and drought? The Christians keep thriving in the Roman Empire. People started noticing, like, there's one community that keeps doing well despite whatever bad things are happening. And it was because they lived out this life that had positive results. It's not, I would say it's more participatory than the Christianity of a lot of Americans, which seems to be this kind of like, well, when we get to heaven, it'll all be good. But they're not living out their faith in any real tangible way that has any meaning here and now. The idea of the politics that come from a ethos of Christian anarchy actually, for the Christian, requires you to be more participatory in your neighborhood. It's not escapism, it's not, it's the opposite is what I'm trying to say. So that was a long way of saying, but I do hear the pushback that you said a lot. And I'm like, no, it is actually the opposite. And I wish I could say that I am had a great example of how I'm faithfully living that out, but it's hard. And the church is a mess right now. And, all I know is I've got my little Christian community. We meet, we're going to gather actually here in a couple hours and try to live out faithfully the calling of Jesus in a society that is increasingly making it sound like we're the bigot and the bad guys. And I don't know. I mean, instead of fighting a culture war, why don't we just demonstrate what it looks like to follow Jesus? Because if we testify that he has changed our life, that he has brought true, genuine life to us, why don't we just live in such a way that that's attractive to those around us instead of advocating for, politicians that we think are going to defend us that actually morally compromise us, without singling anyone out. They're all that way. But that's 2016 made everyone realize that that's what was happening. And I'm grateful in a way. I tell people I'm grateful for the Trump phenomenon because he wasn't a good enough actor to hide it. He showed everyone what it really was. And so when it was ugly and it was filled with hypocrisy and, him trying to play the part, like he's super uncomfortable, talking about the Bible or quoting the Bible. All the politicians, they co-opt biblical language and the language of the faithful. And he was so bad at it that it made people realize these guys aren't really Christians.
I think what was disconcerting for me and what woke me up wasn't that a politician was messed up, because I mean, you expect that. It's that, there were a lot of wolves that took their sheep clothing off, to rally around them. And all of a sudden inside your Christian community, you're like, I didn't see that coming from these people.
I was only surprised by the numbers. I wasn't surprised that it was there. I knew it was there, but I certainly thought that when faced with, the black and whiteness of an extremely immoral candidate from people who, would talk about integrity from our leaders and all this, like all of a sudden they didn't care. And then you realize, holy cow, you never cared about that. And I'm like, I believed you. I believed that you voted for someone because you thought they were the most Christian or the most moral, and moral leadership was important for the church to thrive. I don't agree with that. I never agreed with that. But It's a compelling argument nonetheless. It never was that. It never, ever, ever was that.
Yeah,
and
that's
it's just like
this
wake up call.
The second season that I did was on consequentialism, because that was like I was trying to wrap my mind around what was happening in our community, because integrity was a big thing for, I grew up in a Christian school, Christian college, all that stuff, and I just couldn't wrap my head around it. And then all of a sudden, I realized our Christian community we're relativists, moral relativists, and we believe in ends justifying the means. And there's a whole lot of it in retrospect that was present before 2016 that I just didn't see. I didn't have the lens to view it. But once I found consequentialism, I was like, okay, I can view my community through this now, and a lot of stuff makes sense.
I mean, and that's why I say I'm grateful for it, because it exposed a lot of things that weren't as easy to see. And in some ways, I do believe that while it's created a ton of turmoil, because there's the other side that totally lost their minds and freaked out. The what do they call it? The TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, where it's just like people can't even think coherently about this anymore. And maybe some of that's starting to subside. You're starting to see more liberal voices going like, okay, this has gone too far. Like when Bill Maher starts to sound like he's a conservative, maybe the thing has actually not, maybe you guys have just gone too far to your left side. And if you're calling Bill Maher someone on the right, like I don't think that's what happened here. But and he's still incredibly antagonistic towards Christians. So it's, as far as I'm concerned, we fundamentally disagree on a lot. But I don't know if some of that's subsiding or not, but I do think that eventually we may look back and say that was the beginning point for, it's cliche, but I don't know a better word for it. Revival. Like, I think that it's going to create the atmosphere for the Holy Spirit to work in society, in American society, that is no longer going to be contaminated with state worship. And it has been, like, in my lifetime, anytime there's some sort of like outpouring of the Spirit, it gets mixed in with this state worship. This idolatry gets mixed in, and then the whole thing kind of fizzles out. I mean, I remember more charismatic type awakenings, they call them, like down in Pensacola, Florida, up in Toronto. There was one, like these outpourings of God's Spirit in a way where people were coming to repentance, and you're seeing, God work in people, and you're seeing communities be healed. And then within a year or two of that, they've got political candidates coming in that they're advocating. You look at Bethel, like you look at that, they came out of all those revival movements, and they are so in the bag as pro-Trump. And it was like, you have all these very popular worship leaders in the White House when he was there. And it's like, how did this turn into this? And so I think that we may be able to look back and see a genuine outpouring of God's Spirit that is unencumbered by state worship. And I think that's the other thing that I have taken to do. I call it state worship because we need to call it what it is. I mean, I've become pretty particular with that, and I've had people take offense at that. But I'm like, well, what do you call it? I mean, tell me how this is different from the cult of the emperor in Roman times. I mean, it seems to be far more similar. You got people putting their hand over their heart and making verbal pledges of complicity and solidarity, and saying, I'm allegiant to this state. And you got to, just drive down. You see how many flags you're waving or whatever, and it's like, I don't know. Seems like the cult of the emperor, So, I mean, you just call it what it is. And I think a true revival in America will only break out when it is free from the idolatry of state worship. And that may only happen when the culture does begin to regard Christianity as hostile to their ends, and like we are the agenda of God's kingdom is hostile to the ends of the state. And so I think once we can see that, and maybe 2016 was the beginning of seeing that happen. I don't know. I am very hopeful. I mean, these kind of things, they slow cook, and they're not microwave. So I am hopeful that we can see that, but I do think that somehow we have to disassociate the Christ Church in America with state worship. And I think you're already starting to see it happen in small ways. I mean, you're seeing some churches double down, but it's become more disgusting when they do, right? And they're showing who they are. They're exposing who their true Lord is. So I'm hopeful in that way, because they're showing their cards. And I'm rambling a lot. I don't feel like you're interrupting me nearly.
No, I'll let you talk, but
no, you should interrupt me more.
Okay. Well, so speaking of slow cooking, which I feel is a good metaphor or whatever it is with your profession. It reminds me. So when you were talking about the top down approach versus the bottom up, I think there was a realization that I had in regard to that. I think it might have been the 2016 election, or it might have been the next one. But it must have been the second one, because the first election I voted third party, and then this last election I abstained. And as I was really wrestling through the morality of abstaining, and I remember sitting in church one day, and their announcements, and they're saying, "All right, can anybody volunteer for the food pantry?" And like, nobody's volunteering for the food pantry. There are like two people who always go who volunteer. And I was like, I didn't feel guilty because, I'm busy. We've got stuff to do. I didn't think anybody else was guilty because everybody's got stuff to do. But man, then when you talk about voting, people are like, it's your obligation to be at that voting booth. And it struck me that that showed me where I thought power lay. Like, I have to make it to the voting booth to cast 140 millionth of a say in this election every 4 years. Like, that's duty, that's obligation, that's more morality. But to show up at a food pantry, and build relationships with those people, and show up once a week or once a month for years on end to build relationships in my community.
The idea is it's not going to make much of a difference.
Yeah.
Voting for the right candidate is going to make a difference. But that's not what we believe. And historically, that's not what the church looks like. Like, no, loving the poor and feeding the hungry transforms society.
Yeah, and think about that. So you go to the voting booth, you don't really have any meaningful interaction. Everybody's already made up their mind. Everybody's voting the way that they're going to vote. You don't have a meaningful, loving interaction with probably anybody. And what you're trying to do is, the American get rich quick or lose weight fast. Like, if I can just go and pull that lever and make the guy up there, make those other people my neighbors that I don't really like, make them do what I want them to do, that's going to fix society. It's not going to fix society for me to go and love my neighbor and get to know them so that I don't demonize them, and so that we can have relationships that edify one another. And Christianity is all about discipleship, which is a bottom-up approach, whereas government is all about coercion, which is a top-down. Two very antithetical things.
Well, and what we want to elect someone to be powerful over this stuff, so that ultimately we're very uncomfortable with being changed. We're resistant to transformation, just across the board, humanity, right? And it's because, you can call it some evolutionary survival principles. You know what works, and you're like, we're resistant to things being different. But what God is drawing us out, he wants to write his law in our hearts, as he says, the new covenant that he has made with humanity through Christ is that the law will be in our heart, and it transforms us into the people we should always have been. That he wants to restore our true humanity. But that's uncomfortable, because it means you've got to become a new person, right? And voting for someone doesn't change you. Investing in someone who has greater needs than you changes you. And so that is the hard way, and it takes longer. But I wonder if like our resistance to that isn't so much as that it's so much easier, as that somehow intuitively we know that's going to change us, and we're totally fine how we are. We don't want to change. We're the Christians. We're the good guys. We just need everyone else to agree with us, instead of engaging with people in a way that transforms our heart. And I think that's why God designed us to work this way in societies, because we each get transformed. We each have our hearts drawn more and are open more to love and understanding when we engage in that kind of life. And that's what God wants for us, I believe. And the Spirit changes us. We're transformed through service. My pastor says that all the time. We're transformed through service. And we're not transformed because we voted for the right team. And there is no right team. Like, I don't know how to like red pill people enough to be like, there's no right team. Every move, like, it's just like, it's checkmate. Go into the voting booth. They got you in checkmate. You lost. Like, there's no right move here. Every move you make, you lose. We want to think that we can vote for the right team, and that team is going to fix society, and that through the power of the state, they will create a society that we think is better for, at least for our tribe, for our people. But that is not the way of Christ, and that the way of Christ is the harder way. We are transformed into his people by serving people. And that is that bottom up approach. But again, like I said before, like it's actually top down in an upside down way, right? Because we're believing the power flows from Christ into his believers, into society. But the way it looks to the world is that's bottom up, because it's an inverted kingdom. I have an upside down pyramid tattooed on my rib cage for that very reason, and it has the Greek word doulos, which is slave, and it's based on Jesus's words that anyone who would follow me must be a slave to all. And it's like, and he tells his disciples that in the context of who's going to be by his side, who's going to have the seat of honor in his kingdom. And it's like, well, the most honored in the kingdom will be the best slave to everyone else, be the best servant to everyone else. And like, that's because it's an inverted way of thinking of power structures. And that I don't think that's like, we have trouble getting our head around that. That actually does give you power. Like, it gives you influence. It gives you authority. Like, when you serve others well, you have a kind of say in their life. You have a way of speaking to them. You have the opportunity to love them that you didn't have before. Like, it is powerful to make yourself a servant to others. And it does give you a kind of authority in your community. If you're the best servant, you have a kind of authority where people trust you more. They trust your motives. They trust your word. So it's not like merely like, we think about that in this trite way. Like, no, it's real power. It's real power. And it's more powerful than the power of coercion, as you've talked about. It's more powerful than that kind of power. It's a better power, and it looks upside down to our world, but it is the right way that the universe was designed to function.
Yeah, it's what helped me to see that. I did a season on nonviolent action to kind of look into its effectiveness and how it's done and all that. And while I was researching that, there's this little book called Victories Without Violence. You can get it for free through the archive, but it was just so powerful to see how there's so many times that there's a really violent situation, and it was actually disarming for people to use nonviolence. And one that sticks out to me in a different book. But this guy's on this train and he knows jujitsu or whatnot, and he's in Japan, and there's this drunk guy on a train who's starting to push around this woman, and he's like, all right, finally I get to use my my skills. And this old guy just comes up and says, hey buddy, what you drinking? he starts talking about, what he's drinking, and then he just starts to break down and talk about how his wife died and all kinds of things. And it's like, okay, that one dude could have went and beat up this guy and probably ticked him off, and he just gets on another train, and now he's even more angry and hurts somebody else. But this old guy who could have gotten beat up goes and he disarms this man and gets to the root of the issue, the heart issue, as opposed to just stopping the immediate violence. And obviously that doesn't always work, but if we're going to talk about true transformation, it only happens in one way. Right. It doesn't happen in the other way.
Right, exactly. And yeah, I mean, there does have to be a point when you live that way that it has to be self-sacrificial, even into the point of death. I mean, you give yourself to save another. That's the example Christ has given us. So, I mean, the idea is that we receive violence to end violence. And so, yeah, I like to qualify that I'm not a pacifist, but I am an advocate of nonviolence, because I think that it is more powerful. And pacifism it has a connotation of passivism. Passivism is passivism. My accent's getting in the way there, but PASIFISM versus PASSIVISM. So I don't like using that word because of that. I just say I'm an advocate of nonviolence. So I try to speak of it in a positive way. And I'm not totally ruling out that you might not have a choice sometimes. There's the people always want to bring up the Bonhoeffer exception. I don't know. I'm not. We can talk hypotheticals all day. When someone barges into your home, what are you going to do? I don't know. That's a hypothetical that most people don't ever have to consider.
Yeah. So speaking of tattoos as well, I've got Upside Down Kingdom as well.
There you go. All right.
Donald Craybill's book. I don't know if you read him, Upside Down Kingdom, but that was that was one of the first pacifist sort of books that got me on my route. I love that concept, the kingdom, but then the upside down part. All right, so I want to ask one last question here. So when I listened to your interview with Preston Sprinkle, you mentioned Jacques Ellul, and he had been on my radar for a long time, and I've always wanted to read him. But that was finally kind of when I was like, okay, I'm gonna actually go and read him. Unfortunately, I didn't read him on anarchism because I was kind of already past that season. But I did read him on propaganda, because that's what I'm working on for the next season. And so I read his book Propaganda and his book The Technological Society, and it's like, I mean, he's like Nostradamus, but better, because Nostradamus was like very
it's
ambiguous.
Insane how prescient he was. I mean, really, like, it's nuts to think he wrote in the 50s. I mean, it's just nuts. Like, he is describing ours. So I haven't read the propaganda. I've read excerpts. Let me clarify. I have read excerpts of his work on propaganda, but I've read the Technological Society, and it is mind blowing. Like, it's like he is one of these Silicon Valley thinkers, and it's like there was Silicon Valley it was so far removed from being a thing. It wasn't like it was just before. It wasn't like we could see it coming. No one could see. How did he see this? How did he see how it was going to end up? And I'm like, which makes me think this was all fairly predictable. Like, if it can be predicted, maybe we should have seen more of it coming. And maybe we got manipulated by forces that were allegedly for our good to create a more technologically dependent society that maybe has not been good at all. Maybe it's been sinister, and like, we really need to analyze and think. I think I very much advocate for anyone to go read Jacques Ellul, because it had the effect for me. We're going like, we've all been suckered. There have been sinister forces at play to fundamentally alter society in ways that are not against what is good. And and to create more of a power vacuum, to create more inequity, to eliminate the middle class, which everyone talks about as this fear tactic thing, but it is a really bad thing. You know, it means that the rich are richer and the poor are poorer. And like technology, and you know, there are other thinkers who have predicted that with the rise of social media and a lot of other things, that we're on the cusp of a new dark ages. Some people say we've already entered a new dark ages, where we no longer consider truth and beauty and study and contemplative living as valuable. It's all about like constant entertainment, which is making us dumber. And it's not just like, it's actually making us dumber. It's not making us function in dumb ways. It's like, it's altering our brain chemistry. Like I find myself having trouble reading compared to like when I remember it being as an undergrad. Like I used to could knock out a 200-page book in an afternoon, you know, and really, you know, I would pass any test on the material, you know. And now I'm like, I get bogged down 20 pages into something. It's just like, it's harder to stay with a thought or concept because I'm so online, I guess. I don't know, that the algorithms have affected my brain chemistry in ways that like are antithetical to how the spirit wants to transform my soul. So these are all things that Ellul talks about. Like he predicts all this. Like,
yeah, so maybe you can read Propaganda, and for the next season we'll try to get together again and talk about that. But I think
they're tied together. They're tied together.
Yeah.
I mean, all of his thought is all tied together.
But you've read his book on anarchism, right?
I have, yeah.
Okay, so maybe you could pull out, you know, one or two big concepts that you think he touches on, specifics that you think would be pertinent to our discussion here.
Yeah, well, I've read it a while ago now, so let me think, because the biggest thing for me, and when I first read it, the biggest thing for me was even just considering it as a possibility. Like it wasn't on my radar as an option. And so when I talk to people about, when I try to encourage people to read Ellul on Christian Anarchy, the main thing I'm trying to accomplish is that there's a different way of thinking about politics. And don't trip over this concept of anarchy, but there does need to, like, anarchy carries this kind of mindset of antagonism, of, you know, in some ways kind of militant. And I think that can be helpful to keep that word and say, yeah, we need to have a spirit of that, of like, no, we are against the powers and structures of this world. Sounds very New Testament. It sounds like the Apostle Paul could have written that, you know, but that is the biggest one for me. Now, Ellul is writing not even a decade, I think, after the end of World War II. So most of the idealism of the world, everybody is rethinking their ideas. And he's writing in France at a time when in the United States, you're having the Red Scare, you're having McCarthyism, you're having, that's when they, you know, started doing the Pledge of Allegiance in schools. That's when they, you know, instituted the one nation under God, all that. So you're tying into propaganda a little bit. You're seeing that the state is trying to co-opt the God talk to gain power. And he's writing as a complete rejection. Now he's coming from a place where he was a Marxist, you know, and that's the other thing that I remember reading about the book that I found very surprising. He moved from Marxism to Christian anarchy. But it was the same kind of, he saw that kind of manipulation and propaganda, and it's like, it's really just about controlling populations. It's really about giving them what they think they want, telling them that you can deliver it, and so that you can gain power over them. It's always about that. It's never not about that.
Well, I think that brings us full circle to, we talked about sports at the beginning, which seems completely unrelated. But, when you get into kneeling and flags and army displays or Air Force displays at sporting events, I mean, this is exactly it. You just talked about them co-opting everything, and they do.
They do. And like, I mean, I was listening to a Eagles podcast just this week, and the Eagles, there's a player who was in the Army, like he played football for Army, and he had to fulfill his military duty or whatever. Anyway, they're talking about him maybe not making the roster, and the one podcast host said to the others, like, "Oh, so you don't support the troops?" And then he had to go into this whole thing. I know I very much support the troops, so grateful for what they do, and it's almost like this rote thing. You know exactly what he's going to say because it's what you have to say. Thankful for their sacrifice and enabling us to live in a free country, to even be able to make a podcast like this, because without their sacrifice, we wouldn't be able. They have convinced us that without the military, we wouldn't be able to think and to discuss things freely, as though no one before the advent of the United States of America ever discussed things and spoke freely about anything. Like, only because the troops have invaded other countries and killed the other bad guys are we able to do this. They've convinced us that that's true, and they say this, and they see it at sporting events. Oh, you gotta thank God for the troops, because we wouldn't be able to just all gather and watch a football game if it wasn't for the troops. That's not true. It's not true at all. Like, why do we think that? Like, I don't get it. Yeah. So no, I resist all of that, and and people introduce the concept of patriotism. I'm like, I mean, I'm a patriot to a degree. I'm anti-military, but in the World Cup, I'm as American as you can get. I was like, I'm cheering for the United States, because but the consequences are different. It's like, it's not the same. It's like, I'm proud of the society that has brought me, and has nurtured me and has given. I feel a kindredness to the land that I'm from, and the people, and the ideology. In some ways, I think there's good things here, and I'm proud of a lot of those things. But part of what I'm proud of is that it does, the idea is that we are supposed to be liberated from powerful forces. That was this idea of declaring independence, and we've gotten so far from that ideal. I very much think that a small government, limited, more libertarian society would be more advantageous to the work of the church. We could be the church, and then everyone else can work out your ideas, and let's see which ideas produce a better society, instead of the government trying to force a particular way, or one group electing their officials and saying it becomes this contest of who has the most popularity and who can get their people in office to create that society. Instead, let's limit the government's power to create society, and let's just let it work out. And I think the church will win every time. If it's a fair playing field, I think the way that Christ has led his people to live in society is going to create the most just society, the society that most flourishes. And if there is a level playing field for all, then I think that's going to be good for God's people.
Yeah, it's just like Israelites in Babylon, not eating the king's food.
It's exactly like that. Yes, it's exactly like that. And I think we have to have the mindset of living as exiles. And yeah, you talked about, I was on Preston Sprinkle's podcast. I mean, he, did his conference, and that was the title, was Exiles in Babylon. I mean, I think we need to. And does that mean that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, would they cheer for Babylon's soccer team? Well, maybe they would. There's no moral compromise there, but they're not going to bow to that statue of Nebuchadnezzar. They're not going to do that. And so there's a line you can draw. They were state officials. Like, I bring that up because it's not like total, like, we're not just totally withdrawing, but we are living as exiles. Our loyalties are different. Our agenda is different. That doesn't mean we can't participate in the civilization or the society. It means that we do it for a different reason, with different aims and different goals. And there will be a line that you won't cross. I think if the church in America could just live like exiles, I think that would get us most of the way there.
So I was wrong. I do have one more question, but maybe try to answer it in 2 minutes to kind of keep us at our hour here.
Sure.
So I got to talk with Dr. Christian I knew I was gonna mess that up. Christianopoulos, who wrote Christian Anarchy, and one of the things that he brings up, or he brought up, was that a lot of the Christian anarchists that you're going to read, the intellectual Christian anarchists, either don't believe in the resurrection. They think a lot of the miracles are, no good, or they minimize the resurrection and miracles and things. And kind of similarly, in a lot of the Christian anarchist groups that I've kind of been involved in, it seems like a lot of times there's a limited emphasis on the resurrection, and there's a lot of anti-state. It's almost like anarchy is more about critiquing the state than it is about positively creating a community sometimes, jumping on everything bad the state does. And I almost feel like it's the opposite of nationalism, like where you've got these fanatics one way. Sometimes I feel like the anti-state people are just fanatics for a different thing. And I want to be a fanatic for, Jesus. Like, okay, yeah, of course the state does what the state does, but like, let's follow Jesus. How do you, as a Christian, resolve that when you think about how a lot of the Christian anarchist community is, and especially the intellectuals who you kind of draw from for?
Yeah. I mean, so they're more committed to anarchism than the Christian part, right? And I think that's not, let's get it in the right order. It's Christian anarchy. And all that means to me is that we are loyal and allegiant to Christ and Christ alone. No one can even come in the stratosphere of how we feel towards Jesus and what that means for our lives. But it does mean that what he has called us to will transform our societies. It's not I don't even know if we have to engage to the point of critiquing the state all the time. State's going to state. They're going to do what they do. They're going to try to defend their borders, expand their influence, expand their economy. It's what they do. I don't expect them to be any different. There's really no point in me critiquing that. I've already been told from the scriptures that doesn't last and it won't end well. But the kingdom of God is eternal and forever. So I am trying to live as a citizen of an eternal place within the time period of something I know is destined to perish. And everyone knows that. No one reasonably thinks America is going to last forever, or any state, whatever state you live under. No one thinks that. Everyone knows that state will meet its end at some point. So I'm trying to live as a citizen of a kingdom within the time frame of a rule that is much weaker, that has far less power, but that it currently is the thing right now. So it's like I'm not intimidated by it. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know, the metaphor I think of, it's probably not a good metaphor, but I just thought of it, would be like, if you're playing basketball with your son, it's like, well, he's not that good. I'm bigger than him. I'm stronger than him. I'm going to win. I'm not like trying to gear up like it's a big game. I'm not going to battle like if it's like seriously something significant on the line, right? Like what we have as Christians is vastly superior and more powerful and more eternal and so it's like, in some ways you just kind of like, I kind of have an attitude of, that's cute. Whatever you're doing, that's cute, good. I'm not surprised. I don't have to try to fix it. You know, I don't have to have a comment on it all the time. You know, with the current things we got right now, the Supreme Court's dealing with the abortion issue and all of this. It's like, I kind of just shrug my shoulders. As a Christian, I do think that abortion is wrong. I think it's a sin. And I think it's a result of other sins, whether that's fornication, or maybe it's worse than that. Maybe it's rape, maybe it's incest, or usually comes from other sins, and so my faith gives me something to say about that sin too. And I'm like, well, I'm not surprised by anything that they're doing. The fact that we're even having the conversation is in some ways beneath us. If we love people in a way that transforms their hearts, then society begins to be transformed, and we suddenly have far fewer of these issues. So, and I do believe in a resurrection, and I do believe that ultimately that society will not be enacted until the king returns and takes what's his. We're just living in a way that we're waiting on him to come do that. So we're not trying to overthrow the state. We're not trying to take charge. We're not trying to co-opt their power, because it's not worth our time. We have a greater power within us already, So I don't need to be preoccupied with what the state is doing all the time. I think it's good to be aware. I think it's good to keep your eyes open, but I don't, you're right. It is almost just like being on the different team. You're constantly critiquing and saying where the state is doing that. Well, what did you think they're going to do? Like, why are you surprised by that? Of course they're doing these things that are stupid, and of course they're doing these things that are trying to gain more power and manipulate people and propagandize people, and of course they're doing that. Yes, that's what they do. We don't have to belabor the point. But walking with Jesus is not like that. And we will transform our society to a degree where they're going to see that Jesus is the way, that Jesus is the only way for man to be made right with God in a way that produces human flourishing and justice for everyone. It is the only way. And if you believe that, your attitude towards the state has to be one of anarchism. I'm at a point where I can confidently say that. There's no other, your attitude towards the state has to be one of anarchism. That means, and I'll close with this, because it's not active. Anarchism is a passive, right? It's a negative. It's saying no ruler, right? As Christians, we're saying no ruler but Christ. So we're saying from the absence of something. We're saying all it means is I have no loyalty to the state. That does not mean you have to take up arms and get so militant and get on Twitter and start having arguments with people about it. It just, it doesn't have to be proactive in any way. The only proactive part of it is the Christian part. The anarchism is a negative. It's a reduction. It's a saying, I'm taking things out so that there's only one thing left.
Yeah, right? It's basically just refusing to kiss the bust of Caesar.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't have to say, so saying Christ is Lord means that Caesar is not, right? That's been said by many. But they don't ever say that. They just say Christ is Lord, and they know that means Caesar is not. You don't have to say Caesar is not. You don't have to say that part. You just have to say Christ is Lord. And you know that means Caesar is not. So that kind of needs to be the approach. It's like beneath us to even mention Caesar in the same sentence with Jesus. Like, in some ways, you're making it as though like they're two sides of the same coin. They're not. We don't even have to mention Caesar. We just say Christ is Lord. Period.
Yeah. That's a great place to end. Christ is Lord.
Amen. Come, Lord Jesus.
That's all for now. So peace, and because I'm a pacifist, when I say it, I mean it. This podcast is a part of the Kingdom Outpost Network. Please check out the links below to find other great podcasts and content related to nonviolence and kingdom living.